Welcome to the Standard of Truth podcast. In this podcast, Dr. Gerrit Dirkmaat and Professor Richard Leduc explore the early history of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the life and teachings of Prophet Joseph Smith. They examine the original historical sources and provide context for events of the past. They approach the history of the Church with faith, expertise, and humor.
Hi, welcome to another episode of the Standard of Truth podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Gerrit Dirkmaat, and I'm joined by my friend, Professor Richard Leduc.
Hello, Gerrit. Thanks for having me back. We normally, when we do an episode, you spend 4 or 5 hours in research and collecting, but you sent a text to me. You've been down a Sidney Rigdon sermon rabbit hole, and you were very angry. And I think on this one, I swear you've spent 10 plus hours.
I spent a little bit of time. It's just reading some Sidney Rigdon stuff.
And so normally, we record, lately we've been doing it kind of the week of, but the
week of sounds, let's be a little bit more precise.
7-8 hours before it drops.
Seconds.
We get up at 4 a.m, and so it drops at 6. By the way, so we've got a quick email here from Renee in the Phoebe Draper Palmer Brown mailbag. Gerrit, one thing though I have noticed as I'm looking here in my computer, and I can see myself. I didn't realize that my face was crooked until I started wearing glasses. I thought my ears were properly proportioned and that my nose wasn't jacked up and apparently broken. But now the glasses hang off the side of my face, and I've got a Brian Williams crooked face, and I never knew it until now.
Is it possible that A, the glasses themselves are crooked?
I have 3 pairs of glasses, and they're all doing it. So
is it possible B, that the only reason you notice now isn't because the glasses are on crooked, but because you can now see yourself in the mirror when you look in the mirror?
It's possible, but if I don't set it on my ear, my ears are off by about an inch. I don't know what that is in metric, 37 centimeters. I don't know what it is, but it's about an inch. What was the person that was a certain number of height, and I had him at, 1.5 feet? I can't remember what that was.
I can't remember
the stupid thing I said recently.
Your dalliance with the metric system from the proper English system, the imperial system.
Well, the bummer is we had joked around about getting in here and talking about the Oklahoma State BYU game, but the game hasn't happened yet. I'm sure it's going to be freezing, and I don't think BYU is going to cover by 9.5, but I do think they will win.
What a great time, though, to put in our parlays, to be like, I think that Chase Roberts is going to have a touchdown, that there's going to be one fumble recovery inside the 20.
Those are some specific props, man. You're getting that from like I said, a bookie. You're not picking that up at MGM.
Every person I talk to about this is someone with a more Italian New Jersey accent than the last. So each time you talk to someone about it,
how Italian is his name is Sal, or more Italian than Sal?
Yeah, it's Sal Palantonio. Yeah,
from ESPN.
Yeah. Do you think they had him start up the ESPN bookie? Because ESPN.
Oh, ESPN bets. Yeah, they started. They started.
You
ESPN
think they
bets.
talked to him first?
I think he's been running numbers for some time.
Yeah. It's too bad Jimmy the Greek is no longer around, right?
Yeah. God rest his soul. Good old Jimmy. Good old racist Jimmy the Greek.
Jimmy. Okay. All right. Go ahead.
Well, so this email comes to us from Renee. Not
Gerrit's mom, Renee.
Not Gerrit's mom, Renee.
Okay, right now my mom is listening, and she's like, I don't remember sending them an email.
Maybe it is from your mom.
You know what? Maybe it's from my mom.
A bunch of reasons you need to reply to my email in question is the subject. My name is Renee, misspelled in relation to your mom's name, Gerrit, but still, I'm a retired English teacher like your mom.
Oh, all right.
And I majored in history, but couldn't get a teaching job in that field because I didn't coach anything. That's hilarious.
Wow. Boy, that is a deep cut.
Yeah.
If there happens to be any history teachers listening who have never coached, let us know.
They don't exist. I was born and raised in southeastern Idaho, the Gate City, if you will.
Wow.
I met the man who hired you, Gerrit, to work on the Joseph Smith papers, because during the Q&A I dropped your name, and oh my, did he praise you as unique and masterful, or words like those.
Wow.
How about that?
That guy I hired to do PR for me and pretend he's running the Joseph.
He hired you.
Yeah. I don't even know who she would be referring to, because, who would have a positive response to that.
I can't think of anyone.
I can't either.
Richard, I do not know who originally hired you to co-host this podcast, but I am putting my crack research team on that query. What's funny is that what's hilarious is, Gerrit, you and I attended the Book of Mormon Central.
It was a Scripture Central sponsored Latter-day Saint social media and podcasters conference.
Influencers.
Sorry.
You and I were invited to that.
Well, I mean, I think that they already had the pizza ordered.
It was hilarious. So first of all, when we showed up, you had a name tag printed off, ready for you. They didn't have one for me. It was the most on-brand thing that I've ever attended.
I believe my name was spelled wrong, though, wasn't it?
Oh, your name was spelled very wrong. Absolutely.
It always is spelled wrong.
It is spelled wrong. But so what was funny is that they sent people around, and they were interviewing different influencers. And now as an influencer myself, my wife actually, in the morning as we were getting ready for the day, she asked me a question about President Nelson preparing for General Conference. And my response is, well, I don't know, but I'll ask him today at the influencer.
Right. You assumed that he'd be there.
Yeah. That was the joke. But so somebody came up to me, and because this question here, Renee's asking, I don't know who hired you to co-host the show. And it's a very fair question. Someone asked me a similar question at that thing. And so I said, well, about 24 years ago, I lived in the same kind of apartment as Gerrit, and that's why I'm here today.
It's an unfair question, because, I mean, when someone says who hired you, the implication is that someone's being paid. And when someone isn't being paid, it's a much, who hired you? It's more like who showed up when I put the free internship sign outside the door. It's an unpaid internship.
Well, so anyway, it's a very nice question, Renee. I get the crack research staff. She said, I have read Pilgrim's Progress and Les Miserables, the latter to find out if the vile impregnator of Fontaine and unworthy father of Cosette received a comeuppance of the worst kind. FYI for Richard, he did not. But I hope his future lies somewhere in the depths of Dante's Inferno.
Very nice.
I do have a question. It's the opposite of what I said originally.
Yeah.
I said
well,
I do
as
not
an
have
English
one.
teacher, she wouldn't even notice that.
I do not have one. You know what? Actually, I do. I do have a question. Some time ago, by the way, I did get a positive response from friend of the show, Laura, who said she felt that the recording of the robot version of me reading the email was creepy, but it was read better and pronounced better.
It was technically proficient, but also made it seem like we were a cult.
Yes. So some time ago, a friend lightly cursed President Joseph Fielding Smith for destroying some pages of Joseph Smith's history, not wanting to upset the faith of the saints. Do you have any idea of what he may be referring to? And is there enough truth to the rumor to send Gerrit into a hurlbutt frenzy? I am hopeful. See, Gerrit, people do like the angry Gerrit.
What's a hurlbutt frenzy? Just me being mad, or me becoming like Phalastus or hurlbutt, and I just start fornicating and apostatizing?
So you want to wash yourself in the blood of somebody.
So yeah, in order to become hurlbutt, you have to be willing to try to commit murder. You have to be a pathological liar, and you have to be a multiple times fornicator.
I believe in a recent episode you called him a fornicating fornicator.
Yeah, he's a fornicating fornicator.
Yes.
So this question is this is something that get bandied about a lot more earlier than it does now, this question. And it's actually a reference to the 1832 Joseph Smith history. So the 1832 Joseph Smith history was in one of Joseph Smith's letter books. And at some point, we don't know, several of the pages that contained that history became detached from the remainder of the letter book. Now we know that they go into the letter book because they fit right in, and the lines going across, you can see very clearly that it fits to it. Well, there was a researcher who claimed to have a conversation with someone who worked at the church history back then, the archives. And that from that conversation, what he extrapolated out was that these pages that contain the 1832 history were in existence. They were separated from the letter book, and that they were actually in the First Presidency's vault. So what arose after that was Gerald and Sandra Tanner, surprisingly not the biggest friends of Mormondom, making the argument. They're the ones who founded Lighthouse Ministries and spent much of the 60s, 70s, and 80s and 90s, and then, not as much anymore, attacking the church through various things. So the claim was that Joseph F. Smith, who was the church historian at the time, so he was an apostle, and then he was made a church historian, that, well, he must have deliberately removed those pages from the book, and the reason why he did it was because the 1832 account of the first vision is not, it doesn't say all of the things that are in the Joseph Smith history, doesn't specifically delineate the father and son. Joseph says more things in it than he does about, his lead up to it. And so the claim is that Joseph F. Smith, in his role as church historian, as well as an apostle, excised those pages out of the letter book. Now, if your friend is saying that he destroyed pages, as in got rid of them and destroyed them and they don't exist anymore from the letter book, then your friend probably has less research capacity than your friend thinks they do. That's not a claim that anyone is making. The claim is that because these pages at some point became detached from the larger 19th century letter book, that, well, when did they become detached? Well, it must have happened during the time period that Joseph F. Smith had them in his possession when he was the church historian. So therefore, Joseph F. Smith must have himself cut them out. And now that I've decided that he's the one who cut them out, I'm also going to decide that the reason why he cut them out was because he didn't want anyone to lose their testimony over the 1832 history. So now I'm on my 8th level of speculation, right? So I do know that the pages were cut out at some point. You can tell because they were excised. But you can't tell the reason why they were cut out. And so, or who did it, or when. You have no idea. You do know that in the 1930s or sometime thereafter, one of the pages was repaired, corrected, because they used clear, like cellophane tape, like Scotch tape, essentially, which every archivist listening right now, first of all, isn't listening, but if they were listening, would be leaping out of the nearest window, regardless of what floor they're on. They put Scotch tape on a document, and they'd be leaping out. They wouldn't be able to handle the idea of the documents being abused thus. But look, in the early 1900s, people didn't have the same, they clearly didn't have the same archival training. They didn't have the same reverence for older documents. And so that's where that comes from. I mean, it's a pretty weak statement from your friend. So look, there was an article published in Dialogue where someone laid out the case that it must have been Joseph F. Smith who cut it out, and then further laid out the case that the reason why he cut it out was because of the different account of the first vision. Is that possible? I mean, it's certainly possible. I mean, is it a possible series of events? Yes. Do I know with a certitude any of those things? I mean, heavens, Joseph Smith's journal has a different account of the first vision as well. I don't see that one getting cut out. It's weird to both provide the speculation as well as the reason behind the speculation. I mean, here you have, I don't know who did it, but I'm pretty sure it was this guy. And I don't know when he did it, but I'm pretty sure he did it during this time period. And I don't know when he did it, and I don't know who did it, but I'm pretty sure it was him, and he did it during this time, and the reason why he did it is also this. And the evidence that you have is that one antagonistic researcher claimed to have a conversation with someone at the Church History Archives who told him information that led him to believe that was the case, but didn't say Joseph F. Smith cut this out. Now, that's the most convoluted, boring, frankly, idiotic thing I've ever said on this podcast. I mean, maybe not. I'd probably...
No. You said way dumber stuff.
Yeah, okay. But yeah, Renee, that's... so your friend is reading some pretty deep, weird stuff.
Well, no, so I've actually seen it. I've actually seen it in these as a Latter-day Saint influencer, Gerrit. I'm hip to the kids, and I actually have seen it on the Instagrams as well. As you get older, you just put S's on the end of things. The internet's Instagram.
Yeah, the internet's the webs.
So I actually have seen it in several different places over the past couple of weeks. So it's something that's shooting up the charts.
Yeah, it just gets regurgitated over and over again. I mean, one of the reasons why it kind of faded out for a little while was, well, if you're making the argument that the church is trying to hide the 1832 history, well, the church is doing a really bad job of it because they published it, they created transcripts of it, they created images of it, they put it on front and center on their website. They teach it to every single student in the church's curriculum. So if you are going to seminary and institute, if you're going to adult institute classes, if you're taking any church courses anywhere, you will learn about the 1832 history and you'll read it word for word. And so it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, the church is trying to hide it. Yeah, they're trying to hide it, except that they're doing the most to publicize it of anyone that there is. So I guess it's a poor job hiding it. I for one, probably wouldn't hide it in the seminary manual or in the Doctrine and Covenants manual. It seems like those wouldn't be the places to hide it.
I don't know. I attended seminary. I think it's a pretty safe place to hide it.
Actually, you know what? I stand corrected.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things that's speculation. So it really shouldn't trouble people too much in the sense that there are all kinds of things in what is now called the First Presidency Vault that we actually don't know why they were there. And the church has really gone through a process of transferring a lot of those things back into the church history library. But look, Joseph F. Smith was the church historian for decades. he then not only becomes an apostle, becomes a member of the first presidency, and then he becomes the prophet. So, he stopped doing super active history work while he was the prophet, even though he's the one responsible for a bunch of our church history sites that we were able to reacquire. And so, the items that he had, there was a vault that was built for him to place those items that he was working with as a historian in his office, basically. Well, when he died, it left a kind of, it's not like he had an index card of, oh, I have this in the vault because it has temple ceremony stuff in it. He didn't have like an index notation card of why things were in the vault. And so were these things in this vault because he was just working on them at the time? Were they in the vault because they were so precious that he didn't think they should be in general circulation, like the seer stone? Were they in the vault because it was sacred, private, and confidential, and people shouldn't have access to it? Were they in the vault because he was working on it that day when he stopped opening his vault? I mean, you actually don't know. And this is what's really common with anti-Mormon attacks. There are a lot of ways that could be the case. Only one of them is the most nefarious. They actually, all of the other reasons all have the same amount of information. Like, we legitimately have no idea who cut them out, right? We legitimately don't know when they were cut out. We legitimately don't know why they were being stored. We legitimately don't know answers to any of the questions you would need. But what an anti-Mormon does is they fill in the blanks of those questions with whatever the most nefarious possibility could be. And then they present it to you as, oh yeah, I've got real proof that it's this. So yeah, I mean, it's a mystery for archivists. It's entirely possible that he did that. But maybe Joseph F. Smith excised it out because, I don't know, it was his uncle that wrote it. That it was a great sample of early Joseph Smith handwriting, and he wanted to keep it close to himself. The argument that he cut it out because he didn't like what it said and didn't want people to know about it, that's speculation on top of speculation. It's taking people's current worldview and trying to project it backwards and saying, oh, I'm sure that's what he did. I'm sure that's what, you know what? And maybe he did. It is possible. But I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt that he knows what he's doing more so than someone who's attacking without even any evidence to start with.
Renee does go on to just say that this is actually my favorite part of the entire email. Second favorite part. My favorite part's coming up. Though you were an acquired taste, that's very good. I have come to love you both. I have been listening for I don't know how long, but after Littner's became a beloved reference, I had to listen to many a past podcast to find the primary source of its beginnings. That journey is what converted me, and in my zeal, I signed up for the paid content. How about that?
Hey, we say that to everybody. If it doesn't seem like it's your cup of tea, it probably isn't. But also, look, we do have some inside jokes, like a lot of podcasts do, just because we're best friends and we joke around and when we make mistakes, we make fun of ourselves, and it's very easy, and we make a lot of mistakes, and so there's a lot of things like Littner's, which is actually a mockery of my inability to say the word listener. That Richard decided was so funny that he would just keep repeating it over and over and over again. That because I didn't have the ability to enunciate properly, that, you know what? This is an ongoing joke.
Well, it's easy. I've never made a mistake on the podcast in pronouncing a word or in reading. Although her PS does say, if this email makes the cut and you read it online, please assign it to your dyslexic co-host. He needs the practice. Now, I assume that's you, certainly not me.
Yeah, because I'm your co-host.
That's right. And dyslexic.
Yeah, because he tells you that at the influencer conference. He was like, you know what? But what he really does is like, well, I taught Gerrit everything that he knows. And like, I was the one who said, you know what, let's take a look at the 1832 history and when those pages were cut out. So speaking of arguments, when we last left you, we were talking about Sidney Rigdon.
Well, so Gerrit, I know we want to jump to the Sidney Rigdon, but I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't put in a plug for the tour that is coming up in June. So we have June 22nd through the 28th, Missouri Nauvoo. We're about 2/3 full on that, and Sunday or August 3rd through the 9th in Palmyra, Kirtland. We're doing Missouri Nauvoo in June because Missouri Nauvoo in August sounds like the worst thing anyone's ever heard of.
Yeah, I mean, Nauvoo in August is only outdone by Nauvoo in January and February. You'll notice there aren't a lot of people taking Christmas tours to Nauvoo.
Just riding around on sleighs, horse-drawn sleighs.
You know what? Let's see if we can get together a Christmas tour of Nauvoo.
Oh, I will be out of town.
Well, yeah, you'll be in Nauvoo with me.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, what better way to? And we could have, we could eat, things they would have eaten back then. Some figgy pudding, and
I could dress up. Like who's Joseph Smith's bodyguard that was really kind of a bodyguard?
You mean Porter Rockwell?
Oh, Porter Rockwell. I could dress up like Porter Rockwell, come into the dinner, make a whole scene.
Yeah, but people think you're a drunk Missourian.
And he probably was.
Yeah, I mean the drunk part was probably yes. The
Missourian, no.
Yeah, Missourian, no, but he had been held illegally in Missouri, so there's that. So we love it if people can join the tour. That we've had great experiences. We still communicate with the people on each of these tours because they're just such amazing people. Have had quite a few people ask, we've actually had some people who've gone on both tours, and we have other people who've like, well, I've been to the sites like 10 times. Do you ever do anything else? I'm like, first of all, you should want to go back to where these sacred things happen more than 10 times. So people have asked, we've actually had quite a few people ask, well, do you ever do any like cruises? Well, so with Standard of Truth podcast, we have not yet branched out into the cruise world, but I am leading a cruise for Bountiful Travel. It's a Footsteps of Paul cruise next May. The first, it's May 18th. And it's pretty awesome. I mean, yeah,
that sounds awesome.
Yeah, it is. You go
like you're hitting like Ephesus and
you go Istanbul, Turkey, Ephesus, Turkey, Mykonos, which is a Greek island, Rhodes, where the Colossus was, right? The great wonder of the ancient world. And then Santorini, and then we're going to go to Alexandria in Egypt. And so several days there. So you should check it out. Then we're going to go to Athens. So it's we're going to be following the footsteps of the Apostle Paul. We're going to again be with a group of like-minded people. So for those people who are like, I don't know if I want to do something else, or we've had, like I said, we have multiple people say, well, don't you ever do any cruises? Go to Bountiful Travel's website and look under their cruises, and I'm going to be the speaker.
I will not be contributing much for the rest of this. I'll find the link and put it in the description of this episode. As you're about to
so when I start talking about Sidney Rigdon, you're going to go dark?
Well, I mean, you were texting me saying, "Hey, we should record like right now. Like I'm really mad. We should do it right now." So I've got a feeling I'm just going to kind of lay out and then I'm going to look through the New Testament to see when Santorini came up. I don't remember that.
Look, Paul was shipwrecked on an island. I mean,
it couldn't have been Santorini.
It was Mykonos. I love the idea of Paul sitting with a margarita on the beach in Mykonos, and he's just like, "We got to get this letter off to the Galatians. I'm so tired of their garbage. I marvel that you are so soon removed
That's great.
Yeah, I don't know that Paul would enjoy our humor. He didn't seem to be quite as humor filled as Joseph Smith.
Saul would have loved it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, I don't know. He was pretty taciturn as well. I think it's either way, Saul or Paul. Or did you mean Saul, the person who tried to murder David? Is that you meant King Saul?
I meant King
He
Saul.
loved a good joke. King Saul, he was always funning, doing things to try to have David murdered. I mean, yeah, he was hilarious. His friends always thought of him as funny. So we're back to this conversation. We've had people wanting us to do the succession for quite some time. And so I thought, leading off of the movie 6 Days in August, we'd at least talk a little bit about the Sidney Rigdon claim. And that's the one that's the most well-known to Latter-day Saints, even though it has a much smaller impact both in the long run and even in the short term. It's a really big deal early on, but it becomes less of a big deal as spoiler alert, as Rigdon's church falls apart. And then Rigdon eventually gets excommunicated from his own church, which is, you're going to see the reason why I'm so happy about that as we get further into this. So we talked about how Brigham Young in our last episode, we talked about how Brigham Young was cautioning the saints and that they needed to do what Joseph wanted them to do. And remember, we stopped off with that if God had closed the heavens, right? If we were no longer getting revelation, that I would not give the ashes of rye straw for the salvation of the church. If God has ceased to speak by the Holy Ghost or revelation, there is no salvation. But this is not the case. There seems to be a disposition by many to leave Nauvoo and to go into the wilderness or somewhere else. But what if we should go into the wilderness? And we should ask God to give us an endowment, and he should ask if we were driven from Nauvoo, and who drove you? The devil drove us, would be the answer. Well, he might say, did you not know that I have power over the devil? Yes, but one said that I would not give a jackknife for all of Nauvoo, and another said I would not give a pair of mules for the best farm in Hancock County. And I was afraid. Would the Lord give an endowment to the people that would be frightened away from their duty? Those that are wishing to lead parties contrary to the counsel, I would not wish them damned worse than to have a company after their own liking, for they will soon quarrel among themselves. And if we should go into the wilderness and ask the Lord to give us an endowment, he might ask us, saying, did I not give you rock in Nauvoo to build the temple with? Yes. Did I not, through my providence, furnish men to quarry and to cut the stone and to prepare it for the buildings? Yes. Did I not give you the means to build the temple there? Yes. Very well. Had you died in Nauvoo on the walls of the temple or in your fields, I would have taken you to myself and raised up men to officiate for you, and you would have enjoyed the highest glory. Did you make a sacrifice by tithing? No. Well, I don't wonder that you did not believe I had power over the devil. And then Brigham says, such may go away. I want to have the faithful stay here to settle the city. So one thing that's really clear here is Brigham Young is not saying you can't leave and go do what you want. You're always welcome to leave and go do what you want. But you're not welcome to leave and go do what you want and say it's the will of the Lord through the quorum of the 12. That's the problem. Everyone is always free to leave and enter Nauvoo however they want. But if you're going to leave Nauvoo like James Emmett and whisper to people that actually I'm doing what the apostles told me to do, they're the ones who sent me on a secret mission to come out to Iowa. Well, that's not okay. And again, we relate this to apostasies that are even current in the church today, that people will claim they have some kind of insider access to an apostle, to a 70, to a sealer, and they told me thus and so, and don't worry, I'm the only one who knows it because no one else knows it. That kind of stuff has always happened. Brigham goes on to say, Joseph has always been preserved until now, but he has now sealed his testimony with his blood. And his testament should now be put in force. While the testator lived, it was all in his hands. But he is dead. There is no remission of sins without the shedding of blood. You will soon wake up and know, things as they are, that there has been a great debt paid. There will be no need for more blood of the saints being shed at present. And by you will understand and see that all is right. Woe, woe, woe unto all who have shed the blood of the saints and the Lord's anointed. It must needs be that offenses come, but woe unto that man through whom they come. To those who would go away from this place, I would say, wait until the time comes. I will give you the key. North and South America is Zion. And as soon as the temple is done, as soon as you get your endowment, you can go and build up stakes. But don't be in haste. Wait until the Lord says to go. If you have the Spirit of God, you can discover right from wrong. When all is right with the priesthood, a man rises up and speaks in the Spirit of God. And just right. All will say amen. But when a man rises up and talks as smooth as oil, if he is not right, there will be many queries about it, and it will not edify the body. I give this as a key. You may go all over North and South America and build up stakes when the time comes. The whole continent of America must be organized into districts and presiding elders appointed over each district. Richard's working with one of these presiding elders over a district right now in his Sweetwater Rescue Temple trip, right?
You know what? Can I interrupt Brigham just for a quick second?
I mean, is he going to lose the anger that he has and the verve?
I don't think so. Okay. Line of the Lord. I don't think so. So the listeners, the listeners to the podcast have helped us raise enough money to take every single person who can go to the temple.
Wow.
To the temple.
From that district in Argentina.
From that district in Rio Gallegos. 100 people are going to be able to go to the temple.
Wow.
And
to remind the listeners, it's more than a 2-day bus ride to the temple.
Yeah.
It's essentially 70 salary, right? For someone to go.
It's something like, based on average salary, it's 76 hours round trip on a bus. And it is based on average salary, 8 to 10 months salary. If you spent all of your salary to go. And the listeners to this podcast raised over $38,000 to be able to send every single person that could go that hadn't been to the temple.
That is amazing.
Youth, sealings, own endowments, missionaries.
Thank you so much. I mean, not everyone even left their name with their donation, right? I mean, a bunch of people were anonymous. And
I was texting you a couple days ago saying, I can't believe this silly little podcast. Just the listeners to the podcast are just the absolute greatest people ever to raise that much money in like 3 weeks to cover the cost. We actually just bought all the plane tickets just today for everybody to go.
In fact, the people got together at a district conference.
Yeah.
And sent a video message back to basically to all the people who donated. So we're going to make that so people can watch that. Do you have a link?
Yeah, it's awesome. I'll put the link to the video there. They don't know the podcast. They don't know we're not shooting up the charts in southern Argentina.
This is going to surprise an awful lot of people that in Spanish-speaking countries, we are not the podcast of choice.
We are not.
Yeah.
Parts of Peru and parts of Spain, but that's the list.
Yeah.
But I literally, Gerrit, I just can't believe it's just been the most incredible thing. And so we're going down the 20 or the Thanksgiving week, and we're going to be down with them, and it's just going to be so awesome. Anyway, I can't say thank you enough.
Yeah,
I literally can't believe it.
We really are so grateful for everybody. I mean, to me, that's showing someone. I mean, it is easy to do the charity when you get to personally be there and you get to see what's going on, or when you're helping out someone in your ward and you know them. We have listeners who have never been to Argentina, who don't know one person there, who gave thousands of dollars so that a family could go and be sealed that wasn't sealed before. I mean, the podcast is fun, and you might say it's not really that fun. But this is Zion. The people who love other people more than they love themselves. And it is a good place to insert this in Brigham Young's sermon, because you have an awful lot of people who want you to only focus on yourself or even your own country. And Brigham Young is teaching something that he learned from Joseph near the end of Joseph's life, that it wasn't just Missouri that was Zion. It wasn't just that little temple plot that was Zion. And it wasn't just the United States that was Zion. All of North and South America was Zion. And when Joseph taught that, Brigham did like a, he cocked his head twice, tried to, what was that? Let me write that down. I mean, because no one had thought of that. Imagine the idea back when we didn't have any converts in South America. Brigham Young is just laying out there, all of this is Zion. And now members today, oh, sure, we badmouth Brigham Young right and left, and we just pass right over the top of the fact that here he is in 1844 telling everyone that the work is going to grow in South America and there's going to be stakes and districts built there. And oh, he's not really a prophet, though. Oh, okay. Yeah, because everyone knew that was going to happen. Nobody knew that was going to happen. In fact, people make fun of him for saying that that's going to happen. And it's almost like he's a prophet because he knew it was going to happen. And we as members today are able to participate in the continued spreading of that work. So I echo Richard. I can't thank our listeners enough. One of the things that Brigham says there is that, look, yeah, you know what? The people who are, he doesn't say dumb enough. What does he say? I mean, essentially, the people who are of the type that are either cowards that are afraid they're going to be killed while they're trying to build the temple, or that they are persuaded by false prophets to follow them out, good riddance. Okay. We don't want you anyway, because we've got a lot more difficult things to do than building this temple. We got to walk 1,700 miles to the new place we're going. So if you don't want to follow the prophet, then just leave. That was essentially what he was saying there. But this was all of this sermon, so you don't have to go back to the last episode. And look, the sermon goes on. It's a very, very lengthy sermon. But all of that was, just a week or so after, a week and a half after the August meeting where the church selected Brigham Young and the Quorum of the 12. And the power of the Quorum of the 12 in taking control as the keys they'd received, Sidney Rigdon, they try to reach out to Sidney. He's there in Nauvoo for the next couple of weeks, and they reach out and they reach out and they reach out. And it's easy for people who don't know the backstory to be like, yeah, it's obviously just Brigham Young is trying to like have his own power and stuff. The problem with Sidney Rigdon was not especially that there was a conflict between who should rule the first presidency or the Quorum of the 12. That was a technical issue. The real problem, the real thing driving it, and what I wanted to talk a little bit about today, but I've already spent so much time that I'm not even going to have a lot of time to talk about it today, which is, just keep people coming back for more. Is that what we do, Richard? Or just
they keep coming back for the Sidney Rigdon sermons that you lose your mind about.
Yeah, they want that. Yeah,
they do.
Yeah, me like Kirk Cousins coming out of the locker room. You like that?
you like that?
Yeah. So the real issue is that Brigham Young has discerned in his conversations with Sidney Rigdon that this isn't just about who's in control. It's about the fact that Sidney Rigdon believes Joseph was wrong in the doctrines he was teaching. And I've said it before, I'll say it again. The most motivating factor that there is in Brigham Young's life is Joseph Smith. If Joseph taught it, Brigham embraced it. And he didn't understand, he embraced it. If he did understand, that whole conversation about North and South America being Zion, that's not in the Doctrine and Covenants. So why is Brigham Young teaching it over and over and over again in that sermon? Wouldn't it be much more helpful for Brigham Young to teach that only Missouri and wherever the church moves is Zion? That would be the smart thing to say. You've got a whole bunch of people trying to leave, and one of them going to Texas. Maybe you should say, actually, there is no Zion outside of wherever the church goes. It would have been helpful, but in fact, that's not what Joseph taught. What Joseph taught was that all of North and South America was the land of Zion. And Brigham relates that. And so in Brigham's journal, there's an entry September 3rd of 1844, where again, they are trying to get Sidney Rigdon to conciliate with him, even though he operated in bad faith, even though he hurried and got to Nauvoo and tried to hold secret meetings to get himself appointed. And even though he did a lot of things to undermine, they're trying to retain Sidney Rigdon. And so they meet with him Tuesday, September 3rd. So this is just, a week and a half later. Had an interview with Brother Rigdon. He said that he had power and authority above the 12, and he did not consider himself bound to their counsel. So that's what he told them in the morning. So that should have been enough to okay, that's the end. They meet with him again, trying to persuade him. In the evening, the 12 had a council with him again, and he was far from being or feeling an interest with the 12. After a long conversation, Brother Rigdon's license was demanded of him, and he would not give them up. And this is the part that really sparks the separation. Keep in mind that we are 2 months away from when Joseph was murdered. I mean, we're a little over, because Joseph's murdered at the end of June, and we're now the very first week of September. Sidney Rigdon tells the quorum that the church has not been led for a long time by the Lord, and that he should come out and tell all about the secrets of the church. Now, that may not sound like fighting words to you. They are fighting words to Brigham Young, because a long time hasn't elapsed since Joseph died. Joseph just barely died. So Sidney Rigdon is not making a reference to, Brigham Young and the Quorum of the 12, They haven't led the church right for the 2 weeks they've been leading it. Sidney Rigdon is clearly making a direct reference to what Joseph taught. And he's saying that Joseph was wrong. The unforgivable sin for Brigham Young is speaking badly about Joseph Smith. The unforgivable sin for Brigham Young is to claim that Joseph was wrong in his revelations. Now, I say that Brigham did forgive people who did that, but to him, that was a Rubicon that Sidney Rigdon crossed. Look, Sidney Rigdon hurried to Nauvoo, tried to get there before everyone else, tried to hold a bunch of secret meetings, tried to put himself up as the guardian of the church, excluded the Quorum of the 12 from his meetings. That wasn't enough for Brigham Young to say, get out of here, we excommunicate you. They spent the next 2 weeks begging him to reconcile. Sidney Rigdon says in this meeting, the church has not been led for a long time by the Lord. And Brigham Young is, all right, and scene. We are done here. If you think that Joseph Smith was wrong in what he taught, you can get you and your Rigdon self out of this place. And in fact, this is reflected in what Brigham Young will teach in the general conference that will follow shortly thereafter, where September 15th. So this conversation was on September 3rd, and Rigdon's going to leave he's going to leave Nauvoo, and Brigham Young's going to get up and speak at this conference. So this is the first conference that took place after Sidney Rigdon has left, after they've had the argument over who should lead the church or who had the right to lead the church. Brigham says, among other things, I have frequently thought lately of Paul's words when he said, much every way, some for Paul and some for Apollos and some for Cephas and some for Christ. And I believe there are a great many here for Christ. I will make the application of Paul's words to us. Much every way, some for Joseph and Hiram, the Book of Mormon and the Doctrine and Covenants, the Temple and Joseph's measures, and some for Lyman White, and some for James Emmett, and some for Sidney Rigdon, and I suppose some for the 12. The business of the day will result in this thing. All those who are for Joseph and Hiram, the Book of Mormon, the Book of Doctrine and Covenants, the Temple and Joseph's measures, and for the 12, they being one party, will be called upon to manifest their principles openly and boldly. We then wish all those who are of opposite parties to enjoy the same liberty and to be as decided and as bold and to show their principles as boldly and to be as decided as they are in their secret meetings and in their private councils. If they are for Sidney Rigdon and believe he is the leader of the people, we wish them to manifest it as freely as they do in other places, because this will form another party. We want all those who are for Lyman White and his measures to show themselves openly and boldly, and all those for James Emmett and his measures to show themselves. We wish them to withdraw today without fear and to be as bold as they are in other places. They may as well show themselves boldly, for I know where they live and I know their names, and I can point them out if necessary. Those who wish to tarry and to build up the city and to build the temple and to carry out the measures and revelations of our martyred prophet, we wish to know who they are. Now all those who decline, going either way, but secretly slander the character of Joseph Smith and the 12, my fellowship will be withdrawn from them without any further ceremony. If there are not more than 10 men who hang on to the truth and on to Joseph and the temple and are willing to do right in all things, let me be one of that number. If there should be but 10 left, and their lives should be threatened with destruction by mobs, the temple not built, and because they are determined to do right, let me be one that is martyred. Brigham Young is clearly trying to say here, Joseph said we had to build the temple before we left. Joseph said we had to build the temple in order to receive an endowment. I know there's lots of people who want to go away, but we are going to do what it is that the Lord has commanded us to do. And we're not going to claim that Joseph Smith was somehow wrong. Brigham will go on to say, all I ask of men and women to do is if they believe in Sidney Rigdon and want him to lead them, I want that they should be bold enough to go with him and not say they want to tarry with the church. They say they believe in Joseph Smith, and at the same time, all their operations are to destroy and tear down what he has built up. And then Brigham says something that, frankly, it works its way into to what is, baptismal and temple recommend questions today. Brigham says, it is a test of our fellowship to believe and confess that Joseph lived and died a prophet of God in good standing. And I don't want anyone to fellowship the 12 who says that Joseph is fallen. That is, again, a very good example of how Brigham Young believed that if you don't believe Joseph Smith's a prophet, if you believe that Joseph died as a fallen prophet, if you believe that there's something that led to Joseph's murder, I don't want you. I don't want you. He's going to go on to say that Sidney Rigdon cannot hold the keys without Joseph. If he had held the keys with Joseph and been faithful, he would be with us. If the 12 do not apostatize, they carry the keys of the kingdom wherever they go. And so here this aspect of Brigham Young's life becomes it comes into very clear relief. Brigham Young believes that you can't be a Latter-day Saint and believe that Joseph Smith became a fallen prophet. Now, I want to get into what does Sidney Rigdon say on his side of the ledger, because no sooner does Sidney Rigdon leave that he very quickly begins to publish his own newspaper. In fact, on the same day that this conference is going on, Sidney Rigdon is going to publish in Pittsburgh, probably at the oldest ward ever in the history of, the
Pittsburgh Second Ward.
Yeah, the Pittsburgh Second Ward, the oldest ward that has ever been in existence in the church. He's gonna resurrect a former Latter-day Saint newspaper called the Messenger and Advocate, and so he's going to use that title, and he's going to start his first issue on October 15th, 1844, and he is going to express lots of things in there that obviously attack the 12 and claim that he has the true calling. Multiple letters are published claiming that the apostles are wrong. What's really interesting is you go through the sermons that Sidney Rigdon gives in this paper, and I won't read them all because I got to tell you, they are tedious. I mean, is that while Sidney Rigdon will early on in these first issues, all of the things that he attacks are the 12. He attacks the Quorum of the 12. He doesn't attack Joseph Smith, even though we know because of Brigham Young's journal that he did attack Joseph Smith in private counsel with the Quorum of the 12. But he doesn't do that in these earliest issues. In these earliest issues, everything is about how the Quorum of the 12 have introduced false doctrines, and that the proper right of succession was to the first presidency, not to the Quorum of the 12. Well, he gets a letter in this first issue. He receives a letter from a group of people that are following him that, first of all say, we're only going to follow the first presidency, which is, Sidney Rigdon. Of course, they apparently don't know that Amos Lyman is also in the first presidency, but apparently they only think Sidney Rigdon. They go on to say, having learned, so this is a group of saints in Beaver County, having learned that certain persons calling themselves saints do teach the doctrine of the Nicolaitans, or in other words, spiritual wives, professedly by divine authority, thus turning the grace of our Lord into lasciviousness. This, therefore, is to say to such persons and to all men that we neither believe or receive a doctrine so repugnant to the word of God, and that we hold no fellowship with those who would justify such an abomination. And we earnestly exhort the saints in every place to set their faces against so pernicious a doctrine. Besides this, giving all diligence, add to your faith virtue, and virtue knowledge. So that's a letter written by a church leader to Sidney Rigdon that he publishes in his paper, and then he publishes his response. And I'm so happy that the people with you have, shown their uncompromising attachment to virtue and holy principles since the world began. All the dispensations, so this is Sidney Rigdon talking here. All the dispensations delivered to the men of living God have been thrown into confusion by the introduction of doctrines and practices which were at war with godliness and subversive of all that was good and noble. Hence the distraction of the religious world. He goes on to say that I have been informed that someone in the town had been attempted to teach the doctrine of spiritual wives. Now, notice they're using the term spiritual wifery. This is an incredibly loaded term because that's what John C. Bennett called his profligate adultery, rather than celestial marriage or plural marriage. Because John C. Bennett argued that you essentially had the right to sleep with whoever you want as long as they were a believer. Of course, that's not how plural marriage is being practiced in Nauvoo. But by using that pejorative of spiritual wifery, that's not accidental. Sidney Rigdon knows very well that John C. Bennett's false corruption was called spiritual wifery. So what does he call what's going on in Nauvoo? He calls it the same thing, even though he knows it's not the same thing, because that is such a heavily laden term. It would seem impossible, this is him continuing, that there could be found a set of men and women in this age of the world with the revelations of God's in their hand who could invent and propagate doctrines so ruinous to society, so debasing and demoralizing as the doctrine of a man having a plurality of wives. For it is the existence of this strange doctrine, worse than the strange fire offered upon the altar by corrupted Israel, that was the root of all evils which have followed and are following in the church, and the very mention of it, of which we could not fail to redden the cheek of decency with a blush. Now, you'll notice in that paragraph, there's an implication that this has been introduced not like yesterday. I mean, again, he's railing against this idea of plural marriage. We're 2.5 months removed from Joseph being murdered. So So he isn't saying it yet. You don't notice that he's saying it. He's still blaming the 12 for teaching this doctrine. But he isn't really trying to separate out, why is the 12 teaching this doctrine? And if you're claiming this doctrine has led to the divisions in the church, well, there weren't any divisions until Joseph was murdered. So are you claiming that Brigham Young got the letter in Boston that Joseph was murdered and was like, great, we can now start practicing polygamy? Got back to Nauvoo in August and immediately started practicing it as much as he possibly could, like all polygamists want to do. It's clear that that's not what Sidney Rigdon is alluding to. He's not saying the words Joseph Smith introduced it, but he's saying that the root of all the evils that have followed in the church have come from the introduction of that doctrine. Again, he's not writing to idiots. All of the people that he's writing to are people who are members of the church or were members of the church. They all know about the John C. Bennett heresy. They also all know that the Nauvoo expositor, one of the attacks made on Joseph was that he had introduced plural marriage into the church. So when Sidney Rigdon says all of the evils that have followed since that was introduced, well, who do you think is he saying that introduced it? Now, he's going to keep referencing the 12 because they are his real enemies. For instance, he's going to talk about, Paul talking about silly women laden with lust, led away by diverse lusts, and claim that that's who the women are who are practicing polygamy. So he does a real bang-up job of protecting the women there. But he goes on to say that the 12 and their adherents have entered into the houses and led silly women astray. It is a fact susceptible of the highest proof. The conclusion is that they effected the ruin of silly females by or through a form of godliness. Now, here again, he's going to make an allusion to Joseph, but he's not going to say the words Joseph. Now, remember, this is brand new. Sidney Rigdon's primary claim, in fact, the entire first part of this newspaper is a gigantic letter from one of Rigdon's sycophants who's laying out point for point using the Doctrine and Covenants, how it is that Sidney Rigdon is the rightful leader of the church and not the 12. So it's referencing Joseph Smith constantly in it. Here, notice this subtle allusion. Paul says that the corruption that he has described was to take place in the last days. Now, from this, the people of the last days are authorized to call anything of the kind which makes its appearance, it matters not by whom these corruptions were introduced. Prophet, apostle, evangelist, or pastor. Whosoever introduces them has an account to settle with Paul in the great day when the affairs of the universe shall be adjusted before the umpire who cannot err. For either these doctrines and practices are corruptions, or else Paul stands charged with a departure from the truth. Now, why do you think he included that? It matters not by whom these corruptions were introduced. Prophet, apostle, evangelist. They were not calling the quorum of the 12 prophets at the time. We do ordain prophets, apostles today as prophets, seers, and revelators. But that is not how they reference. And in fact, it's a capital P, prophet. It matters not by whom these corruptions were introduced, prophet. Do you see the subtle jab there, Richard?
Yeah, I can see. It's interesting in the movie 6 Days in August, right? Sidney Rigdon is not a very beloved character toward the end, And me not knowing very much about the details as you're describing here, I can very much see how that would be the case.
Yeah, and this is a warm up. Let me just leave off here. We've gone too long, and we always do, because that's what we are wont to do. It is a fact well known that the 12 and their adherents have endeavored to carry on this spiritual wife business. That's now maybe he's referencing, because he says in secret, so maybe the carry on is that, you're trying to do this without anyone knowing, which is certainly true. They're not doing it publicly. That I hardly need to mention it here, that they've gone to the most shameful and desperate lengths to keep it from the public. Again, we're 2 months removed from Joseph being murdered. Is he saying that all of these polygamous marriages have taken place in the last 2 months? Obviously, he's not saying that. First, insulting these innocent females. And when they resented the insult, these monsters in human shape would assail their characters by lying and perjuries and a multitude of desperate men to help them to effect the ruin of those whom they insulted. And all this to enable them to keep these corrupt practices from the view of the world. I could bring facts which can be established in any court of justice in relation to these vile abominations practiced under the garb of religion that would make humanity blush. No falsehood too great and no perjury too daring in order to conceal these heaven-daring abuses of mankind. But I say in the language of Paul, they shall go no further. For their folly shall now be made manifest and will not cease until it is manifest unto all. So the issue is that as he rails against polygamy, Sidney Rigdon certainly knows that Joseph was practicing polygamy. And yet he's trying to draw adherence to him on the basis of he was robbed of his rightful claims and that the 12 are practicing polygamy. There's a couple of allusions in there to the fact that the 12 aren't the ones who came up with this. But early on, Sidney Rigdon is trying to lead people with a flaxen cord until he can bind them with strong chains. Because what we're going to talk about in our next episode, if people haven't completely stopped listening because they don't want to listen to this, I did say the word polygamy, though. I mean, right?
Yeah. We've received several emails from one particular listener that...
Nate emailed us multiple times on this very question about whether or not Joseph taught plural marriage.
There you go.
And I think he kind of found his answer before he got around to it because we talked about it on another episode. But, you know what, Nate? You'll enjoy this when you get to it, that we're talking about it. So we'll talk more about what happens going forward with Sidney Rigdon and these claims in our next episode. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for listening to the Standard of Truth podcast, hosted by historian Dr. Gerrit Dirkmaat. If you know anybody that could benefit from the material in this episode, please share it with them. And for more resources, visit standardoftruth.com. Until next time.